Ireland has Apple's European headquarters, Google's, Facebook's, Microsoft's, TikTok's. In fact, over 70,000 people in Ireland work for American tech companies. But here's what doesn't make sense. In 1987, just 37 years ago, Ireland was the poorest country in Western Europe. Unemployment was 18%. 1 in 7 people were emigrating. The country was basically bankrupt. So what happened? How does a small island nation with 5 million people, fewer than the city of Los Angeles, become one of the wealthiest countries on Earth in a single generation? The answer involves a controversial tax strategy, a linguistic accident from 800 years ago, and a bet that absolutely should not have worked. This is the story of modern Ireland, and it's way stranger than you think. Let's go back to 1987. Ireland is in trouble. The government is spending way more than it's making. Debt is 125% of GDP, which means Ireland owes more than its entire economy produces in a year. Young people are leaving by the thousands. There are literal ships called the emigrant boats taking Irish workers to Boston and New York. The country has tried everything. They've borrowed, they've raised taxes, they've cut spending, nothing works. And here's the thing, Ireland has always been poor relative to its neighbours for centuries. Part of it is colonialism. Britain ruled Ireland for 800 years, and when independence finally came in 1922, Ireland inherited almost no industrial infrastructure. Britain had deliberately kept Ireland agricultural. It was a food producer for British cities. So by the 1980s, Ireland is stuck. It can't compete with Britain's established industries. It can't compete with Germany's manufacturing. It's too far from continental Europe to be a trade hub. But there's one thing Ireland has that nobody's really thinking about. In 1987, a new government comes to power with a radical idea. Instead of trying to build Irish companies, they're going to attract foreign ones. And they're going to use the only 2 advantages Ireland has, English and location. Here's the strategy, and this is where it gets controversial. Ireland sets its corporate tax rate at 12.5%. Now that might not sound dramatic, but compare it to the rest of Europe. Germany is taxing corporations at 30%, France at 33%, the UK at 35%. Ireland is basically saying, if you're a company that wants to do business in Europe, set up your headquarters here. You speak English, you follow EU rules, and you'll pay a fraction of the taxes. But here's the genius part, and the suspicious part, depending on who you ask. Because of how international tax law works, if you're Apple and you design a product in California, manufacture it in China, but your intellectual property is owned by your Irish subsidiary, guess where you pay taxes? Ireland. The tech companies start arriving in the 1990s. First it's pharmaceutical companies, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson. Then it's tech, Microsoft in 1985, Google in 2003, Facebook in 2008, Apple's operations center in Cork, and suddenly Ireland isn't poor anymore. By the year 2000, Ireland's economy is growing at 10% per year. They're calling it the Celtic Tiger. The unemployment rate drops from 18% to 4%. Wages double. People who left are coming back. Ireland goes from emigration to immigration. Workers from Poland, Nigeria, Brazil are moving to Dublin for jobs. Today, Ireland's GDP per capita is $99,000, higher than the United States, higher than Germany, higher than Britain, the country that colonized it. But here's where the paradox gets really interesting. If you actually visit Dublin today and talk to Irish people, they'll tell you something that doesn't match those numbers at all. They'll tell you that rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in Dublin is €2,000 per month. That's $2,200. That's more expensive than most American cities outside of New York or San Francisco. They'll tell you that buying a house is basically impossible unless you're making 6 figures. They'll tell you there's a housing crisis, a healthcare crisis, that it takes months to see a doctor. So what's going on? If Ireland is so rich, why do Irish people feel poor? This is where we need to talk about the difference between GDP and GNI. GDP measures everything produced in a country, but in Ireland's case, a huge chunk of that production is just accounting. When Apple reports €100 billion in profits through its Irish subsidiary, that counts as Irish GDP, even though that money was earned by products sold in China, America, everywhere but Ireland. economists actually invented a new term for Ireland leprechaun economics because, the numbers are so distorted by multinational accounting that they're essentially fictional. Ireland's real GNI, which measures income that actually stays in Ireland, is about 35% lower than its GDP. That's, well, the biggest gap of any developed country. So the money is flowing through Ireland, but it's not staying in Ireland. Meanwhile, because all these high-paid tech workers are moving to Dublin, housing prices skyrocket. The government just can't build fast enough, and regular Irish people, teachers, nurses, police officers are getting priced out of their own cities. There's a term for this: rich country, poor people. But here's the really controversial question. Is Ireland even collecting taxes fairly? In 2016, the European Commission orders Apple to pay Ireland 13 billion euros in back taxes. They say Ireland gave Apple illegal tax breaks. And here's the weird part: Ireland fights the ruling. The Irish government argues in court that they don't want the 13 billion euros. Think about that. The EU is trying to force Ireland to collect taxes, and Ireland is saying, no, we're good. Why? Because Ireland's entire economic model depends on being the low-tax option. If they start actually collecting taxes from these companies, the companies might leave. And if Apple leaves, does Google leave? Does Microsoft? Ireland is trapped in its own success. In 2023, Ireland finally agreed to raise its corporate tax rate to 15%, but only because 137 countries agreed to a global minimum tax. Even then, they managed to negotiate exemptions and, loopholes. Ireland's government revenue from corporate taxes reached 22 billion euros in 2023, which is about 30% of the total tax revenue. The uncomfortable truth is that Ireland is now dependent on this system. Corporate taxes make up 30% of Ireland's government revenue. If those companies actually paid taxes where their customers are, in America, in Asia, Ireland's government would face, a massive budget crisis. So they're stuck. They can't build enough housing because they don't want to scare away the tech companies with higher costs. But the tech companies are making it, honestly, impossible for regular people to afford housing. So what is Ireland really? Is it a success story? A country that escaped poverty through clever policy? Or is it a warning? A place where the numbers say rich, but the people say struggling? Maybe it's both. So, Ireland took a gamble back in the 1980s. They bet that, in a globalizing world, simply being a tax haven with English speakers would be enough. And, in many ways it actually worked. Ireland went from emigration to immigration, from poverty to wealth, from irrelevant to, essential. But honestly, they also created a system where the wealth isn't quite real, where the numbers are sort of an illusion. It's a place where corporations thrive, but citizens still struggle. And here's the thing, Ireland isn't unique. Countries all over the world are, watching this model. Singapore does it, the Netherlands does it, even some US states do it. The question is this the future of economic development? A race to the bottom on corporate taxes where countries compete to be the best deal for multinationals? Or will something eventually break? Ireland's story isn't finished. The housing crisis is getting worse. The EU is cracking down on tax loopholes, and a new generation of Irish people is asking, we're supposed to be rich, so why can't we afford to live here? The Ireland paradox continues. If this video changed how you think about economic development, let me know in the comments. And if you want to see more stories about how countries actually work behind the numbers, not just the headlines, subscribe. Next week, I'm investigating Dubai because that story is somehow even stranger than this one. Thanks for watching.